Hello, and welcome to this session. In the next 50 minutes, we will discuss how the digital transformation in healthcare that is based on data exchange between medical as well as in vitro diagnostic devices and IT systems will impact the industry. In this session, we want to talk about this new environment that calls for interoperability and analyze, together with our panelists, the strategic impact for manufacturers and technology providers. Moreover, we want to discuss with you how your organization can join it. We will give you three perspectives on the topic of interoperability. A clinical perspective from Charles Alessi, a perspective from a personalized healthcare provider from Jennifer Pougnet, and a perspective from a MedTech company from Paulinka Bandel. And of course, we would love to get your questions. So please use the chat window to post them. I will monitor the questions and comments, and we will try to address them in our Q&A session at the end of the talks. Before we start now to explore how the push for data will impact the medtech industry, let me introduce you to your host for this session. And I would love to see my first slide now. Perfect. Let me. So here are our panelists. So my name is Stefan Schlichting. I am a manager at Unity, and I work in the field of interoperability for the last little bit more than 10 years. And if I think about interoperability, I always think about how we could use the data inside of medical devices, typically, as well as in the IT systems outside, and make the world better. And maybe Paulinka, maybe you can say some words to you and your role in the world of interoperability.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. My name is Paulinka Bandel, and I'm working for a company called Draeger. And I focus there on the go-to-market strategies for system solutions. And what we try to achieve is that we're looking beyond the medical device alone and seeing how they can impact the whole ecosystem in the hospital.
Thank you, Paulinka. And Jennifer, maybe a few words to yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Jennifer Pougnet, and I work for Roche, and my function is working on data policy globally. So we're looking at how can we enable global data ecosystems to connect, and interoperability being a key enabler of that. So what through policy discussions do we need to achieve to enable that? So that is our focus and topic of discussion today.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. So, Charles, maybe you can say some words to yourself and your role.
Thank you. My name's Charles Alessi. I'm Chief Clinical Officer of HIMSS. And really my role is to assist organizations in managing data and information to improve the health of citizens everywhere. And in essence, that's what I do.
That's perfect. And I think that's also actually a very perfect start to get into our whole topic of interoperability and how the push for data might impact the industry. And maybe, Charles, maybe you can give your opening statement remarks. What is the perspective from your side on this topic?
Well, I mean, what a time. At what a time we're talking. I mean, COVID has completely overwhelmed health and care systems globally and outpaced the ability of health and care systems to really manage the effects of COVID. There's a saying, and it really does come to mind. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And wow, are we in a time where decades have happened in a few weeks? Because digital transformation has been overpromised to a degree over the last few years. But suddenly it's all come at once, like the famous London buses. You get none for an hour and 10 within about 10 minutes. Why is this so important? And why does this play in to the area of interoperability? And I think all we need to do is actually think around what the effects of COVID and the pandemic has been on populations globally. And of course, we have to be thinking not only in terms of people who have suffered, and sadly some have died of COVID, but also, of course, of people who have suffered, continue to suffer, and died of other conditions. In other words, the whole issue of excess deaths is probably the best way to really understand the effect of this pandemic. And the effect of this pandemic, as I said before, has affected non-communicable disease at least as much as communicable disease. Of course, people with hypertension, people with cardiovascular disease, people with cardiometabolic disorders, cancers, rheumatoid arthritis, their conditions haven't suddenly stopped because there's a pandemic. But sadly, our treatment, our management, our assistance to individuals has to a large degree stopped because of the pandemic. Partly because our focus has been upon treating the pandemic and its effects, wholly appropriately, I might add, and partly, of course, because people have been too scared to get help and assistance around their non-communicable diseases. With some reason, because certainly in the first waves, nosocomial infection, in other words, infection which we have transmitted from health systems to patients, has actually been a significant factor. So why is this all important? I'm coming back to interoperability, because of course, in the way we manage non-communicable diseases, and of course, non-communicable diseases are and will remain the focus of the delivery of health and care with or without a pandemic, because in essence, people die of the cancers and of the cardiometabolic conditions, are now understood to be around a life course. And around the life course, of course, you've got to be thinking of very long longitudinal relationships with a multitude of players in a multitude of positions and sectors who actually assist an individual, often before they actually develop symptoms associated with a disease process. In other words, we're thinking not only of an episodic approach to treatment, but really more and more around a treatment which is much more personalized, and really where we're thinking much more around the single version of the truth, where a medical record is ported from place to place. But to do that, it clearly needs to be able to do that. And this is going to be the challenge. Interoperability is something we have to be thinking of now, because treatment is actually taking place now in the management of non-communicable diseases and using digital modalities to deliver it. Back to you, Stefan. I don't want to say too much because I'm fascinated by the discussion that's going to follow.
Thank you very much, Charles. And I think that was a perfect start, and it perfectly sets the stage also for our next two guests, Paulinka and Jennifer. And maybe we can have the slides again so that we can give the stage to Jennifer, who will present her view and of a personalized health provider on the whole topic of interoperability. Jennifer, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to learning from my fellow panelists and the Q&A that follows. So why does interoperability important to healthcare and important to us? So we have found that healthcare data are typically fragmented and aggregated in unconnected silos. Interoperability breaks down these silos so that data can freely flow across healthcare systems. It provides us with the capabilities to safely, securely, and effectively exchange and use information from or among one or more devices, products, technologies, or systems. It enables us to work together within and across organizational boundaries to exchange data and advance effective delivery of healthcare for individuals and communities. Without the free-flowing movement of health information, value is lost in the system. By enabling the seamless flow of health information through the use of interoperability, we can leverage data, technology, and analytics more effectively than previously possible. This will enable us to advance clinical research and enhance patient care. This is central to how we view personalized healthcare and is in alignment with what is put forward in the European Strategy for Data. Insights from data can provide us with a deeper understanding of disease, For example, comprehensive genomic profiling enables more accurate personalized diagnosis in oncology. Insights drive the development of personalized treatments that are targeted to the individual patient's genomic profiles, and personalized predictions based on complex biomarkers. Evidence-based clinical decision-making based on high-quality data and insights will enable more effective patient care that reaches beyond medicines. Data and insights enable payers to make faster, better decisions on the safety, efficacy, and value of new treatments, and care to ensure that each patient has access to the best possible integrated and personalized treatment options. Finally, data and insights enable the development of new tools for symptom reporting and remote patient monitoring to enable physicians to rapidly optimize patient care and make more informed clinical decisions. However, to make this vision a reality, we need to unlock the potential of data in healthcare. To advance healthcare and improve outcomes in the future, we need to upgrade our healthcare data ecosystems now, and this needs and requires interoperability. Interoperability strengthens infrastructures and enables more effective use of data, and we are committed to supporting interoperability within and across healthcare data ecosystems to make personalized healthcare a reality and deliver a higher standard of care to each and every patient. But the challenges facing interoperability are multifaceted, with technology, data, format, human and institutional and organizational layers. Therefore, our approach to data policy is directly in alignment with the HIMSS framework for interoperability that addresses each one of these levels. Creating truly interoperable data ecosystems requires technical interoperability, syntactic interoperability, semantic interoperability, and organizational interoperability. Applying these interoperability principles described will strengthen data infrastructures and enable more effective and efficient sharing and utilization of healthcare data. We feel that it will actually enable more effective data transfer between health technologies, which enhances our ability to deliver care. So one example that we have is in collaboration with Kaiku Health, we co-created an app that enables patients with cancer receiving immunotherapy treatment to report their symptoms in real time, direct to their healthcare providers. And this enables prompt adaptation of their healthcare plans with the aims of improving patient outcomes and their overall quality of life. So syntactic and semantic interoperability essentially put in data into a consistent and universally understandable format, which makes real-world healthcare data more usable for the purposes of clinical research and clinical workflow optimization. And finally, organizational interoperability enables effective data sharing within and across organizations, maximizing the utility in both clinical research and clinical practice. So we'll see if my clicker works again. And there we go. So we really do view interoperability as a key to strengthening data infrastructures to optimize the effective utilization of data into clinical research and clinical practice. Robust data ecosystems enable seamless communications between healthcare providers, providing the right information to the right person at the right time to improve patient care and outcomes. Interoperability is a foundational enabler for artificial intelligence and machine learning. AI-based tools can enhance diagnostics and screening and enable the development of clinical decision support tools to optimize care delivery. It also enables data exchange between mobile health apps. This can also permit remote patient monitoring and drive the development of digital biomarkers to detect disease progression and treatment responses. It ultimately is the key to unlocking healthcare data, or the potential of healthcare data in our healthcare systems. We are moving away from the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare and are investing in data to make healthcare systems more sustainable and more able to deliver healthcare at a lower overall cost to society. Data and insights enable smarter, more efficient research and development and provide a deeper understanding of disease from bench to bedside, which can be used to accelerate the development of novel and personalized treatments. It also provides the knowledge and tools to make better earlier go or no-go decisions on experimental treatments and design faster, more efficient clinical trials. It also enables the free-flowing movement of data through this cycle of insight generation and is critical to realizing personalized healthcare. So we feel only by working together to create interoperable data ecosystems will we be able to realize personalized healthcare. So apologize for the interruption, but thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on interoperability.
Thank you, Jennifer. And this was just the start. We will definitely discuss a little bit more in our Q&A session. So maybe Paulinka, maybe you can share your view from a MedTech company on the whole topic of interoperability.
So yes, the view from a MedTech company. Draeger is a medical device company focusing on the acute care area, so meaning ICU, OR, and the neonatal ICU. And if we see where we are coming from and what our customers are coming from, we're looking at a trend where we see that many more medical devices are placed around the bed. And these devices are obviously not only from one company, but obviously from multiple companies. And these devices are also placed around the bed more related to the technology or the infrastructure of the hospital rather than to improve the patient care. So there is quite a lot of areas where we could look at improvements. If we move to the next slide, I'm trying to see if my clicker is working. Otherwise, maybe Stefan, you can move us along. Yes. Let me go back. So all these different medical devices have obviously different user interfaces, which makes it more complex for our caregivers, but they also have different maintenance and service requirements. And what we often see is the device connectivity is more or less an afterthought. So devices are bought based on best of breed. And once they end up next to the bed, it's like, oh, how do we actually do the connectivity? And then the problem starts. So we believe that in the medical device area, and especially in acute care, there is still a lot of challenges to overcome. So if we zoom in a little bit on interoperability and what challenges we are facing from a MedTech perspective, is that first of all these different devices that you see around the bed, they all have their own network protocols. That means Draeger has its own protocols and all the other vendors as well. So that means that sharing of information or connecting these devices together to enable this flow of information is very difficult today. And then even if we have the information and our devices and they have a lot of valuable information for our caregivers, it is quite difficult to place them in the area where the actual caregiver needs it at the time that he or she needs it. So the availability of data and information is still limited. And then obviously we all see the topic of data security, the cyber attacks that even happen with medical devices today is a topic that we still have to address properly. We are obviously working on this, but we have to ensure that this is further enhanced. And then if we talk about interoperability, which is the topic today, what are we facing up until today is that our devices can talk in one way, we can send data out, but we can't really use the data in the network to operate our devices. So bidirectional communication today is not possible, mostly related obviously to risk management. So if we want to go towards what Charles already explained and also Jennifer, to go for real interoperability, these challenges need to be addressed. So if we now look at what does it really mean if we have proper interoperability, then we see that we have a lot of potential to improve, especially preventable medical errors. So a lot of mortality is still happening today because of errors due to missing decision support or too much information or complexity. And we should be able to reduce this. And interoperability actually is a way to do this. On the other side, we can also avoid serious inefficiencies. And if I go back to the workplace I showed in the ICU on the first slide, if you see all these medical devices, this is very difficult for the caregiver. This is not a proper workflow. So we can still improve the workflow and the efficiency in the hospital and around the bed. So that is really what we believe, that this potential is there and we should tap into it. So if I move to the next slide, I'll go into that a little bit deeper. What do we then see as Draeger as being the value of interoperability? So obviously we focus on the acute care. So for us, improving patient outcomes is the most important thing. Everything we develop should contribute to this. And so our main area of improvement we see is the reduction of adverse events. So how can we make it safer for the patient? The second part is the optimization of workflows, which I described just before, that we could really reduce the number of errors and improve the workflow for the caregivers, reducing staff burnouts. And if we do interoperability properly, what Jennifer also described as being a standardized way, a common way, an ecosystem where other parties are working together, then this environment is really future-proof for our customers in the hospital or in personalized healthcare. So it is the right way, and it is the right way of bringing value to our customers, is what we believe. So now, how would Draeger do this? Or what is Draeger's vision then related to interoperability? So obviously we focus on medical devices. We're a MedTech company. So our vision is that if we connect all these devices together and let them interact in this bi-directional way, based on standards and based on medical grade data that we can really use, then that is the way forward for new clinical applications. This is the way for us to bring the next level of clinical improvements. And Charles, you mentioned it already related to COVID. What if we can let these devices communicate bi-directionally? That means that we could move towards remote control. We could move towards applications that are smart and automated. And that means that you could help the caregiver treat the patients, even if the caregiver is outside the door, like in an ear isolation room. And these are scenarios that maybe were very far future, but with the pandemic and with the situation we have seen in the last year, these are becoming reality already now. So this is where we believe we can make a difference as a MedTech company. And obviously the last bubble, we have to ensure this is done in a secure way, because otherwise, interoperability comes with connectivity, and it has to be cyber secure and secure against hacking and all those threats we see outside. So this is the view we have, and this is where we believe we can drive interoperability from a MedTech perspective. And if I now go to the last slide, which was the topic we discussed before, related to what impact does it have for us as a MedTech company? It has a lot of impact, I can tell you. And I've listed the main items on the slide here. We are looking towards using new protocols to connect our devices. We are looking at a new cybersecurity concept that we have to implement. We are looking at a new technical approach, our own network versus a standardized network, Dependency management in development. Multiple devices need to communicate with each other, not just one device. Testing concepts, regulatory approach, business models, skills in our own organization, and obviously also different stakeholders we need to address in the hospital. We were focusing on clinical staff in the past, but now IT departments are utterly important for us as well. So it has an enormous impact for a medtech company, and I've listed the main parts of it, but maybe we'll hear many more in the chat later on. But we believe it is the right way forward. It is the right way to improve acute care. So we have to move in this direction.
Thank you very much, Paulinka. That was a very good insight and summary of the view on of a medtech company like Draeger it is. And I would actually like to go over now to our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, just use the window in the chat functionality, and please post them so that I can present it to our speakers. So as a start, I would actually like to have a question on my own that I would like to address to you. And maybe we can start with Jennifer here. So who do you think are the main critical actors we need to get on board for success of interoperability in hospitals in the healthcare system from your perspective?
Oh gosh, it's definitely a lot of players, and as Paulinka highlighted, some non-traditional stakeholders that industry isn't used to working with. So engaging with CIOs and IT departments in a way that we previously haven't. So I think that's something that's very important. I think engaging both public and private is also very important, and Paulinka highlighted that. I think the lessons learned from the United States Meaningful Use Act implementation, in which they focused so much on the incremental adoption of the EMRs, they underestimated the market forces that were at play, and the EMR vendors desired not to make their products interoperable, and that's where the value of that act would have come. And so now we're seeing new policy emerging that they've had to use to address that. So I would say also, obviously I'm biased, but policymakers, that's a very important piece, and it's happening in a lot of different places. It's happening in trade discussions where we're discussing digital trade, and then the infrastructure element. And I think for us as an organization, recognizing DG Connect is a relevant group for us in the EU that previously we might not have engaged with. We would have been very focused on purely DG Santé. So I think it's really considering those non-traditional partners, and that both public and private have to participate.
Perfect. So, Charles, so what is your take on who are the critical actors from a clinical perspective?
Well, I mean, obviously the providers of care, and whoever that happens to be, not only physicians, of course, the whole panoply of providers of care within hospitals and more in the community. But there's another dimension we keep on forgetting, of course, and that's the people, the recipients of care. Because to make interoperability fly, clearly we need to change the way we manage care. This isn't a translocation of a bricks and mortar interventions and interactions into a digital interaction. This is more around the change of pathway, a fundamental rethink of the pathway where people need to gain much more control over that process and engagement within a process. Because, of course, there's many reasons why interoperability is not a good idea. According to perhaps business models of the past, by the way. I think it is a good idea, I have to admit. And I think Jennifer alluded to that when she said that, you know, with the act in the US, you'd have thought interoperability would have been taken up, but actually they've had to go back and think again around how to make that happen. I think a little bit of pull from citizens would also help with this process, because citizens still are really surprised that we don't speak to each other, are really surprised that we make the number of medical errors we do, associated with the fact we don't have access to the same version of the truth.
Yes. How do you see actually the point that Paulinka presented, that maybe even the devices share the data with each other to improve the clinical process?
I think that we are in a new world where this world of 5G, clearly, devices are speaking to each other. And thank God they are, because what they're doing is enabling us to develop the data points we require to develop then the insights associated with AI to assist the physician in managing care better. But over to Paulinka, sorry, because I just took some space because you vanished.
Yeah, like Jennifer, I was told the meeting was ended. So I don't know who is managing these things in the background, but all good. So Stefan, back to your question of sharing data between medical devices and between, therefore, vendors. I think it is, in the end, it is needed. I mean, obviously, as Charles said, the business models were not like that before. And obviously, every vendor would have benefited most if the customer would go only with this vendor. But going back to the picture maybe I showed on the first slide, reality is not one vendor can manage the care of the patient alone. And in the end, the patient is what matters. So in my opinion, it is a given that data of multiple vendors is going to be shared in the future. The topic that we have to overcome and the challenge we have is how to do that securely and how to do that in a standardized way. And thirdly, how to then work with those authorities, our regulatory approval processes and risk management topics, that we can actually reach that goal. And that is, I think, the steps we need to look at in the coming years. Because even if you want it as a vendor, there are so many areas where you are almost prohibited from doing that. Based on risk topics and regulatory topics. So I think that is what needs to be addressed. How can vendors work together in that framework that we have today?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we also have one question to that regard in the chat. The question is, the EU regulations today have very heavy requirements for medical device manufacturers. So how can authorities work to facilitate interoperability requirements? So maybe, Jennifer, maybe you have a thought on that, or Paulinka. How could the authorities really help with that regard? Maybe policies, maybe regulations could help in that. Jennifer,
I think through the policy initiatives. Oh, sorry, Stefan. I was just going to say, I think there's some positive momentum in the European Union in particular that is paying particular attention to interoperability and how through policy this can be enabled. So through the Data Governance Act that's been put forward, interoperability is a consideration, and there's some active mechanisms through Gaia-X and the Joint Action Plan that both are looking at what interoperability standards could be set in the context of the common data spaces as part of the European strategy for data should be implemented. And I think one of the challenges that we were having when I was my very first job implementing EMRs back in the day, we're still having some of the same conversations, is almost changing it to more an agreement on what the principles that need to be achieved when we're considering a standard, right? Because we tend to get hung up on using the standard as a measurement at a policy level and trying to advocate for a single standard body, which is just, as the levels of interoperability should articulate, it's never going to be a single standard. It's going to be a set of standards that are going to address the different domains. And then from there, when we evaluate those different standards, if they meet those principles, we're more likely to achieve this interoperability, as opposed to really like changing the conversation so that it becomes a bun fight over what standard body is going to be implemented. So I think there's some really positive movement and changing the conversation to those principles in the context of the Data Governance Act and those two applied mechanisms that are looking to enable interoperability in Europe.
Perfect. So if we go more into that direction, we have another question, and I don't know, maybe Charles, Paulinka, you can answer that. Which countries, regions in Europe do you see are moving towards requiring interoperability to some degree? So my first thought would be of all the activities, of course, that are going on currently in Germany, where we see laws coming up similar to meaningful use, maybe even more strict. So what is your thought on that? Maybe Charles.
Thank you. I mean, I've got some experience of Germany because I was medical director of the British Armed Forces there for a few years. And I had some real difficulty around the rules which existed at the time between the Landen in actually getting records from across the road, because that's where we ended up very often, where it had to be translated into a PDF, and I had to physically go and get a PDF and cross the road with it. I mean, it was quite crazy. And I think we've moved a little bit since there, and I think that is useful. I think we have a way to go in Europe. The first question was also around medical devices and licensing of medical devices. And I mean, we can compare the approach that Europe is taking and the EMA is taking as to the approach the FDA is taking and what we find in Asia Pacific. They're fundamentally different approaches with, I think, a more proportionate and perhaps one would say a more, dare I say, modern approach, perhaps in countries other than Europe. We have to be careful that we don't end up in a situation where, assurance ends up killing what we're trying to do, which is deliver better care for people.
Very good.
Yeah, I think, Stefan, maybe from our perspective, we see a couple of countries moving faster, like especially Scandinavia. When it comes to medical device, even tenders in hospitals, we see already higher requirements for interoperability. So that's more from the healthcare industry. Also, Northern Europe, Netherlands, Belgium, we see that already popping up. And now Germany with its digital law or digital push related to the pandemic, I think are the countries that we see are moving as fast related to interoperability, and some other countries are rather maybe slower in that perspective.
Okay, thanks for your answers. And I have another question that is from our chat, and it's related to the whole topic of security threats in an intensive interoperability setting. So maybe, Paulinka, because you started to talk already a little bit about it, maybe you can talk to that point and how you see it a little bit more.
So obviously, yes, we notice these threats, and obviously also when we talk to our customers in the hospital, cybersecurity is one of the main topics whenever you talk about connectivity. As a medical device company, I think the action we need to take, and we have done, is that there are separate product security groups within a MedTech company. At least this is the case in Draeger. And these product security groups are separate from any other entity in terms of development, and they provide the requirements and they provide the framework based on which every device or solution needs to be developed. So you cannot cut corners in any way. It is the basis of how the devices are developed. And that group obviously stays on top of any kind of new security threat that is happening and can react fast. And then the requirements from them are pushed to all the product groups that we have. And so this is a way we address security, right from the development all the way to then patches being sent out within 48 hours to ensure that whenever we discover something, the device is immediately updated and has that security patch. And that is the approach I think we can take at the moment, and we are doing this. But we have to continuously, dynamically evolve whenever there are new threats coming up. But this is the way we address it in a medical device company.
Yeah, so there's one direct question to what you just proposed. It's any thoughts on the approach proposed by an IEC standard, so the technical report 6061-4-5. I don't know, Paulinka, that's probably not your direct space, but I know your colleagues, Matthias and so forth, from a regulatory, they worked on it, and I think they're actually co-editors of this standard. So we will probably not go into the details of. It's an interesting specification, and I think it's very good. Maybe Jennifer, how is it handled at Roche, this topic?
Oh, I would definitely not be the person to speak to cybersecurity per se, although I can say we do look at it try to delineate the discussion from a privacy and protection perspective as two separate things, right? So the protection is where our cybersecurity would come in, and we definitely try to approach both with a privacy by design, just as Paulinka was mentioning.
Perfect.
So right from the beginning, considering how can we mitigate any potential risks in the actual design and then subsequent implementation. But I do have other colleagues that would be much better suited to respond to more technically.
As Paulinka said, it's probably its own group of very special folks that deal with all this.
It's a specialty for sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
Then we do have one short question maybe before we go to our closing remarks, and it's addressed to I think maybe both of you, how to ensure or what do you think that the regulatory approval process be able to keep pace with the need for security in the future? So with all the patches and so forth, or
I think it would have to somehow be improved, because if what we're doing today is based on your submitting versions of your software, and then obviously updates at the moment you can just push through. But if you have bigger updates, we still have to go for regulatory approval, and the more solutions are based on software, I think that kind of process would have to be somehow rethought and remodeled to at least make it possible for medical companies to stay with these submissions. So it is not ideal just yet, I must say.
Very good. So as we come to the end of our session, there are some more questions, and we probably will be just send us an email or get into contact with us so that we can answer that. Maybe we come to one or two sentences closing remark, and maybe we start in this case with Charles. So what would you say, how will the push for data impact the MedTech industry?
I think it's going to have a fundamental approach upon the MedTech industry. We already touched on cybersecurity, and I think it's important we actually mention this again, because it's gaining in importance all the time. If we look to what happened in Italy, for example, just after the pandemic started, and they really started to increase the number of players and the digital approaches associated with COVID, they got an attack very, very soon after. And what it's done is really expose the vulnerability of our systems. This has to be thought of from the start. And also we need to continue on this personalization issue, because personalization together with security, together with a lifelong approach is the way we're going to be managing health and care. And of course, the MedTech industry, this is an enormous opportunity for us to really develop products which actually fit within this. So it's really up to us to step up to the mark. This is a God-given opportunity.
Thank you. And Jennifer, what is your closing remark?
I think that interoperability is such a huge opportunity for healthcare and for delivering better outcomes for patients and health systems overall. I really hope that, if anything, people come away from this discussion thinking that, how important it is to consider in any governance plan that's built on a strong foundation of privacy and protection, that it considers interoperability and how you're going to establish that connectivity, and that you really consider the different stakeholders' needs. So that we really are encouraging that public-private participation in progressing this.
Thank you. Paulinka.
So I think I'm with Charles and Jennifer. It is the way forward, and it provides tremendous opportunities. So that's a given. We have to drive in this direction if we want to enable the next level of care improvements. As I mentioned, the impact is huge. So it really will mean a change of mind, a change of habits, a change of processes in the medtech industry to get there. And therefore, the road is not easy, but it is the only road we should take. And I think the pandemic has showed us that change is inevitable, and it has accelerated it. So it is the right way forward, but it is not an easy road. I think that is everybody needs to realize that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's our time is over now, and I think we had a very interesting discussion on the whole topic of interoperability. I really would like to thank you as our panelists, and we are looking forward. If you have any further questions, just contact us, please. So thank you very much again, and have a nice MedTech Forum 21. Thank you.